Hey guys, welcome to episode 8 of my solo podcast here at the Total Hockey Training Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Skahan. And before we get into it, also a reminder that Train Heroic Total Hockey Training, we're in our postseason phase. We're going to be transitioning to our off-season phase pretty soon, which will entail 4 days a week of training. So get on that. Program changes every 3 weeks. We have players from all over the world participating in this, and it's a lot of fun. And I am on there quite frequently interacting with my clients. So today's topic, it's a topic that I never really got to discuss in public as I worked in the NHL, but it's something I have a lot of passion for, and it's man games lost to injury. Okay. What does that mean? Well, I look at teams in all professional sports track that metric. It's how many games have they lost due to injuries. So that could be any player who is not able to play in a game because they're injured. And for me, it's just something I always had in the back of my mind. And it was something that not a lot of people wanted to discuss. It was something, where you just didn't talk about it. It was frowned upon to talk about behind the scenes in the professional sports setting. It's something that you just don't talk about. You don't discuss. You don't say, hey, how can we get so-and-so to come back quicker? You can't really do that. The player's health is the number one priority all of the time. But what I want to talk about is this kind of public perception, I guess. I've seen professionals lose their jobs sometimes because of their teams having a high number of man games lost. And can it be something that the strength and conditioning coach can do to prevent? Can they prevent injuries from happening? Well, I want to dive into that because I think one, yes, they can. And is that cocky? Is that arrogant? I don't think so. I think that as a performance coach, especially at the professional level of sports, you have to have a confidence in your abilities and a belief in your system that it is going to help drive the number of man games lost to injury down. And that's going to help keep your better players in the lineup to help have your team have success. Now, where I do get kind of lost or I don't agree with is when the public or the media doesn't take the time to look at the nature or how some injuries can occur. And so, what does that mean? Well, I'll just say this. Strength and conditioning coaches cannot prevent bone injuries from happening, broken bones. And so what does that mean? Well, you can't prevent an athlete from getting in the way of a shot where their hand might break. Or nowadays their foot might break from a slap shot. You know what? Nowadays, I don't know, a Brent Burns slap shot off your foot might not end in the best possible set of circumstances. You might have a broken toe or a broken foot bone, whatever. You can't prevent that stuff from happening. And so do you not want your team to be not blocking shots? No, you want to be blocking shots. You want to be putting your body in front of flying pucks. But I do think the strength and conditioning coach can assist or decrease the number of soft tissue injuries that can occur. And what does that consist of? How do you do that? I think to me, it's a lot of times sometimes it's having those candid conversations with players that the strength and conditioning coach may not want to have. It's improving, say, you might have a fair or you might have a not wanting to do situation with a player who might have a history of having groin injuries, for example, or hip flexor injuries, or low back pain. And you might not want to have that conversation with this player because you might be thinking, oh, he's so and so, he has his own plan in place. Well, again, like I said, talked about earlier, you're there for a reason. You're there to help athletes. And I think sometimes you have to be willing to cross that bridge and have that discussion with that said athlete and be like, hey, listen, we need to look at ways that we can address this or help this and allow you to be more healthy. And for me, I've done that a lot across a lot of times, and they were very uncomfortable situations. But most of the time, they ended up being great situations. And so I used to really enjoy that because my job was to help players and get those man games lost to injury down. And so what would that mean? It would be like, maybe if it was a low back pain situation, we were incorporating, quote, core exercises to help his low back pain, doing things in the weight room that would allow him to not keep having low back pain, but help him get better. Same thing with groin injuries. Groin injuries, we would look at, say, what can we do? This is when you usually start to have some groin, hip flexor lingerness. What can we do to prevent that? And what I really enjoyed doing was incorporating systems and programs on a global basis. So, God, I mean, nowadays, every team has massage therapists, they have foam rollers, they have warm-up preparation times, but back in the early 2000s, that stuff wasn't really going on. You had situations where, well, this is what I do, this is what I want to do. Then you start looking at trends, and then you start seeing, okay, what we can do from a team perspective. We can start doing, say, team foam roll sessions. I remember, we'd have to bring a bag of foam rollers on the road for when we would do our team foam roll sessions on the road. Every player had their own foam roller. This was, early 2000s. But did we prevent injuries just because we foam rolled? Maybe, maybe not. But I thought it helped. And I had a belief in the system that what we were doing, if I was going to take something to the team I was working with, I had to make sure that I believed it would work. Now, what I'm proud of is with the first team I worked with, I should say, I tracked the metrics all the time. I believe we were second in the NHL from 2002 to 2015 in terms of the total number of man games lost to injury, and I'm proud of that. And not many people know that. I do because I tracked it. And I remember the number one team was Tampa. And I attributed that because back then, the coach was John Tortorella, and he was known for not having practices, I think, after the month of December. They never practiced after the month of December. So I looked at it like, okay, there's something there. There's something there with resting the players. And at this time, with the team I was working with, we had I should say, a no days off type of culture. And we were winning. We won a Stanley Cup. We were playing for Western Conference Finals. So why would it change? And why would I go to a successful coach who was doing things his way and having success and say to him, well, we need to take more days off? And that wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. Am I weak for not doing that? I don't know. But I will say this, that I thought I saw a trend where when the league instituted 4 days off per month, I saw a trend in injuries decreasing. And was that due to soft tissue injuries decreasing? I think so. I think the amount of time that players were practicing back then was way too much in comparison to where we're at right now today. Today, mostly, I don't know for a fact, but I know a lot of teams do optional pregame skates. They have their 4 days off mandatory per month. They have their optional pregame skates. The athletes are fresher. The game is faster. And I think that's the trend we're going to see. And so going back to having a system in place, you have to have your belief system where, for me, we were strength training all the time. We were always strength training. I think that the more we strength trained, we were maintaining or increasing our hypertrophy to help sustain getting soft tissue injuries. That could be shoulders, could be knees, backs, whatever, from the collisions that could take place in the sport. But I think the overuse injuries we really address with our foam rolling, our core training work. And a lot of times, when you have these soft tissue injuries, that could be, that's a tough call, because sometimes a player can get in his own way. You have this whole, are you hurt or are you injured mentality. And a lot of times players can keep playing through being hurt, but not necessarily injured, if that makes sense. And so what happens is that effect of keep trying it, see how it feels. Maybe you're masking it with a Toradol injection every now and then. The end result of that can be disastrous, and that can lead to something like a surgery in a situation. But again, the pressure of, hey, I'm the team's best player. I need to perform. I need to achieve these bonuses. That all comes into play. And so I hope this makes sense, but I just think from the media perspective and the fans' perspective, saying, hey, this team has so many injuries, it must be the medical staff or the strength and conditioning staff. Not necessarily. I think if your team is blocking a lot of shots, look underneath the layers of see what the injuries were, because not a lot of strength and conditioning coaches prevent bone injuries from happening. Now, I will say this. Injuries that can happen in the weight room, most of the time, I'm going to tell you this story, most of the time are unacceptable. And I'm going to tell this story. I'm not proud of it, but it's a story that did happen in Anaheim in 2007. One of our best players, actually Chris Pronger, who is a very, very was a very instrumental player on our Stanley Cup team. He broke his toe in our weight room. And naturally, a lot of negative people that I had to work for back then immediately blamed it on me. And you know what? Yeah, I could take some of that. It happened on my watch. But, Chris was doing a set of rear foot elevated split squats. He put the dumbbells on the ground, and I'll never forget it. I still hear him. I still hear his yell in the back of my mind sometimes. I was used to his yell, but this one he carried a little bit more weight. When he returned his foot to the floor, his big toe hit the floor, and he was out for 10 games, and it sucked. Fortunately, we went on to win the Stanley Cup, but that did happen in my weight room. But things that, if you're doing exercises where the form doesn't look good, or maybe you're like, yeah, this is probably not a good exercise for that individual. Maybe that exercise shouldn't be taking place, or maybe you're doing too much weight. I think that is on the strength and conditioning coach. I remember vividly, we acquired Scott Niedermeyer, and at that time in my program, we were doing hang cleans. And Scotty's technique was not good. And but like being Scotty, the person he was trying to do them. He was going to do them. And I was like, yeah, hey, listen, I don't think you should be doing those exercises. And like, maybe we should go do this instead. And that was a point where I was like, okay, this guy won. I think he won 3 Stanley Cups prior, just won the Norris Trophy a year or two prior. At the time, probably the most efficient elite skater in the world. And I wasn't going to be the guy that, say, messed up his back or maybe his wrist, because I was trying to teach him how to do hang cleans. We found an alternative. And that's when I realized that, like, okay, not everyone should be doing hang cleans. That was a long time ago, probably 2005. But anyways, I'm sharing those stories because, you have to be invested in trying to prevent your team's man games lost to injury going down. You can't be one of those guys that say, I don't care, whatever. They're going to happen. It's beyond my control. And that's not the way I looked at it. I remember having discussions with GMs about saying like, hey, like this is what we do. We've saved millions. And it's not just the strength and conditioning coach, it's also the athletic trainer at the time. Nowadays, this with the staff numbers, it's everyone involved. And I just want to say, like, I think it's important to take those numbers with a grain of salt. And if you do have a situation where you do have many soft tissue injuries, sorry, then maybe there's something to look under the hood a little bit more, and maybe it is the training program. But I always just never took a back seat to just say, all right, I have nothing to do with this. I'm just going to do the best I can. I always thought, bullshit. I have a lot to do with this. And I think if I do a good job with this, our teams could be healthier and we can do better. So hope you enjoyed this. Please, if you have any questions, please reach out, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.